Bore da a chroeso. Good morning and welcome to all those joining from Wales. Thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Phil Taylor and I am Welsh Government's Regional Manager for the Middle East and North Africa region. Next slide, please, Nick. Firstly, I'd just like to go over some housekeeping rules today. Please could you turn off your camera and mute your audio if you haven't already done so. Please use the chat function to post questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll facilitate a Q&A session at the end of the presentations where we'll go through those questions. If we can't answer a question during the session, we'll respond later via email. We'll be sending you a short questionnaire after the webinar, so please do fill it in as we really value your feedback. And finally, the session is being recorded and will be available on the Business Wales website. Next slide, please, Nick. So I'd just like to remind people joining, if they could, apart from the speakers, if you could switch off your camera and mute your audio, please. For those who don't know me, I'm Phil Taylor. I lead the team representing Welsh Government in the region. I'm based at the British Embassy in Dubai, along with two other team members, Joe Chard and Charlotte Mora. The other member of my MENA team, Susie Golden Lynch, is based in Doha, Qatar, and that's the team based out in the region. Welsh Government has had an office based in the UAE since 2004, and our primary focus is to promote exports from Wales into the UAE and wider region. However, our remit is slightly broader than that and encompasses the three core ambitions as set out in Welsh Government's international strategy. So in addition to supporting exports from Wales, we are also tasked with facilitating investment from the region into Wales, as well as raising the profile of Wales in the region more generally by promoting the culture, academic excellence, tourism and food and drink of Wales. We work very closely with Business Wales and the Welsh Government International Trade Advisors based in Wales, some of whom are on this call. We also work closely with the Department for International Trade team in the UAE and in each market across the region, as well as their service delivery partner in the UAE, the British Centres for Business. Today, we're going to be joined by some very experienced speakers based in Dubai, who are here to impart their knowledge and experience of the UAE market for your benefit. First up, we'll have Paul Giles, CFO with Shamal, a holding company whose portfolio includes some of Dubai's highest profile projects in real estate, tourism, hospitality, leisure, entertainment. With 18 years experience of living and working in the UAE, Paul was appointed as Welsh Government's envoy to the UAE in November last year, and as such, he's a really valuable asset for Wales and for you. Then we'll have Joe Hepworth, founder and CEO of the British Centres for Business. Working alongside DIT, the BCB was established with the mandate to provide operational support and market entry services to UK SMEs in the UAE. After Joe, I'll be talking to Sama Hassan, Business Development Manager for the MENA region for Wales-based Concrete Canvas. The company manufactures concrete on a roll for erosion control, containment and shelter, with applications servicing a number of sectors, including rail, road, petrochem, mining, agriculture, utilities, public works and defence. Samir has been based in Dubai, developing the market for concrete canvas for a number of years now, using the UAE as a base to service the wider region. Samir will impart some of his experiences of exporting to the UAE and region, along with some tips and challenges to watch out for. Samir is currently out of the market, so we are keeping our fingers crossed that the technology works today. Finally, we'll hear from Joe Chard, my deputy based here in Dubai. Joe will run through some of the trade activity we've got coming up in the market over the next few months or so, including a very brief overview of our participation at Expo 2020 in Dubai. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A session at the end, facilitated by Alan Jones, one of our ITAs, International Trade Advisors. Please do make the most of that, and please do post your questions throughout the webinar in the chat bar. So with that, I'll hand over to Paul Giles now to give you his Envoy view of the UAE market. Paul.
Thank you for the introduction, Phil, and very good morning to all those back in Wales. High-level background, the UAE is a relatively small country with a population of just under 10 million people. But last year, the UAE was the 10th largest export market to Wales. As you would expect, trade was significantly down with the pandemic, probably down about 40% from the previous year. If you go back to pre-COVID, trade was about £500 million on an annualized basis. That actually made it the 8th largest export market to Wales in 2019. Put that in context, UAE may be a relatively small country in population, but outside of Europe, it was second only to the US in 2019, so a very significant market to Wales. So what's been happening over here recently? COVID 2020 was an exceptionally tough year here, like it was everywhere. However, the country leadership has done a tremendous job managing through the pandemic. We've only had one shutdown, which was in Q2 last year. And once we reopened in July 2020, we've stayed open, but obviously with some level of containment measures in place. The vaccination program has been world class. In fact, UAE now has the highest level of vaccinations in the world, running at 159 vaccinations per 100 people. And over 65% of the population have been fully vaccinated. Generally, it feels very safe. We do wear masks in public areas, but everything is carrying on relatively normal. We talk about the economy. There's been a strong economic recovery and pickup. This has been partly due to how well the country has been managed through the pandemic. UAE is an oil-driven economy, and oil has increased from $50 a barrel at the start of the year, and is currently around $75 a barrel. So that certainly helps, and certainly helps economic sentiment, although only part of that increase was demand-driven. There's been OPEC policy drivers as well to support that price. All the business talk last year was about cutting costs, preserving cash. But this year, it's much more about capitalizing on the growth and driving investment, so much more positive sort of business sentiment there. GDP is expected to be around 3.5% for 2021, so very much back to growth. In the real estate sector, another very important sector over here, of course, for Q2, just ended, Dubai had its best real estate quarter for the last 8 years. Expectation is the real estate sector this year will be about 30% up on last year. Looking at aviation, another key sector, Emirates has already ramped up the routes they're running, and they're anticipating to achieve about 90% routes being operated by the end of July. Now, passenger volume may not still be at sort of the pre-pandemic levels, but certainly ramping up very quickly. So good recovery there. Biggest issue is actually the UK, with the UAE still on the UK red list. And this is, of course, a very profitable route for Emirates, and something we hope gets put back in place very soon. The hospitality sector has been hit hard with various countries' travel restrictions, and particularly in key markets such as UK and India, and that's really hitting the sort of tourist numbers. But there has been pickup from other markets, from some of the European countries, and particularly strong in Russian and CIS visitors. If you look at the hospitality sector, generally beach and resorts hotels have recovered very quickly and performing very well in room rates and occupancy, and really not far off sort of pre-COVID levels. However, it's a different story if you look at on hospitality and city hotels, which are still suffering from lack of business tourists. Construction is one sector that's a bit sluggish, really primarily due to lower level of new projects being launched. I know we've got a few people on here today from the construction sector, but put that in context, the UAE construction sector, even at 2020, was worth over $101 billion, so it's still a significant sector, and that is expected to grow to reach about $133 billion over the next sort of 5 years, so a growth rate of about almost 5% a year there, so still a big sector. 2021 is a really big year. We've had a great first half year. Probably, I don't think there's a single CEO or CFO I've spoken to that isn't tracking nicely above budget this year. So we've started well. The momentum is there. We've got the Expo kicking off in October for 6 months. It's the 50th anniversary of the country. That will be celebrated in December. We've got some very big projects come online very soon, including Envoy, the largest observation wheel in the world. And if you don't know, it's 250 meters. You compare that to London Eye at 135 meters. It's a scarily big wheel. Dubai Harbour, the largest marina and cruise development in the Middle East. That's opened up with 700 berths available for yachts. There's 2 state-of-the-art cruise terminals there as well, and just waiting for the cruise industry to recover and start cruises going through Dubai. The Euros, of course, just ended. Congratulations, Italy. And now we're looking forward to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, which is less than 500 days away. And that will be another driver for hospitality around that time in this market. So all very positive and all very exciting time, really. There's been a couple of recent changes impacting businesses as well. Many initiatives have been rolled out to encourage inward investment and making the country a long-term home for residents. They've recently passed a law allowing for 100% foreign ownership in companies. Previously, you could only do this in free zone locations, not mainland. Otherwise, you needed a 51% local partner. So that's a major change. There's been lots of work on visa programs, such as remote working visas. Last week, I met someone from Swansea who has a recruitment business, has now relocated or operates that from Dubai. Business is still back there. So lots of remote workers coming across now. There's 5-year multi-entry visas. There's retirement visas for those over 55. I'm not getting too far away from that now, which is good news. Student visa programs, golden visa programs for major business contributions. Really all aimed at attracting investors, entrepreneurs, and special talents to stay in this market. So, in summary, yes, we're still in a COVID period, but we are emerging quickly and very optimistic and excited about the prospects ahead. It's a market that should be on your radar if you're not already here, and we need your help to push above that £500 million level going forward. And you have an excellent support network from Welsh Government back in Wales and on the ground in here. British Government, British business groups in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which are very active. Global Welsh are about to be setting up after the summer over here. And of course, myself and other members of the Welsh diaspora will do everything possible to help you as well. So thank you and best of luck.
Thanks very much, Paul. And, it's good to hear what you said about the more positive sentiment now, and also obviously that there is growth and GDP is forecasting 3.5% growth going forward. Lots of positives to take out there. As you say, things are difficult, but there are positives to take from it. So now I'd like to invite Joe Hepworth to provide you with his view of some of the opportunities and key trends we're seeing in the UAE at the moment. Joe.
Thank you, Phil. You can hear me okay? Yep. Good. All right. Thank you. And good morning to everybody in Wales. And thanks to Phil and the team for putting this on and inviting me in. As Phil referred to in his opening remarks, I run an organisation here called the British Centres for Business, the BCB, and we were set up in 2013 through a joint British Dubai government programme to provide support for British exporters, particularly at the SME end of the market, with all manner of market entry support and services. So we've been doing that for now 7 or 8 years. We've helped more than 500 British companies directly with a variety of sort of trade support projects. I think at the last count we'd recorded over £100 million of export wins on the sort of that bilateral channel. And we also have an incubator here where we can help British companies come in and set up and hold your hand for up to 5 years whilst you get the engine started. So we're sort of firmly part of that trade and support infrastructure that both Phil and Paul mentioned to help companies like you succeed in this region. I've got 20 minutes now. I might only take 10 because Paul's used all my good lines there. So I'm COVID cross. No, but seriously, I think what Paul's done there has presented I think sometimes in this region and those of us who live here, you often get a sort of a rose-tinted view on things. There's never any bad news in the UAE, but I think genuinely what Paul was saying there was accurate and honest, if you like, in that where we are now in the UAE and the wider region to an extent, recovering from COVID is really, really positive. And I sort of echo what Paul says around the sentiment and talking to people in whichever sector. Yeah, okay, construction's still a bit rocky and aviation's not a great place to be right now, but most others are reporting very positive growth prospects. You know, first half, first quarter, depending on where your financial year is, has probably been good. And with things like Expo on the horizon, Qatar next year, there's an awful lot to look forward to. I won't repeat what Paul said, but I don't think you can divorce that sort of strategic geopolitical developments from what's happening on the ground. Now, obviously, the COVID situation has been very well managed here and is a positive. And, you know, I've heard of companies as well who are looking to relocate or have relocated because of that, because of the way the UAE has managed to keep a balance between economic openness and public safety and public health. But I think, you know, even before, well, no, it happened during COVID. I mean, just over a year ago, or just under a year ago, rather, the UAE and Israel and Bahrain and Israel and a couple of other Arab countries issued, I think for most of us on the ground, it was something fairly unforeseen. They were called the Abraham Accords, whereby for the first time ever, the UAE and Israel recognized each other. We've now got embassies and ambassadors set up in Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi respectively. And you might say, well, what's that got to do really with me as a Welsh company doing business in the UAE? Well, look, it has a lot, because the UAE is a big, you know, is an interesting, it's a big small country, or it's a small big country. It's a population of 9-10 million people, but it's that regional access point that is beyond the interesting market that the UAE represents in itself. It's that regional access. And I think now being able to run, you know, previously it had been a GCC headquarters place, it had been a MENA headquarters, maybe MEASA if you include India or something, or South Asia. Really now you can, you know, there was always a country grayed out on the map, and you're already seeing lots and lots of Israeli companies coming here, UAE companies coming there, and international companies who have been looking at the UAE or Dubai in particular as a regional hub have now got a whole new country in play that they previously couldn't even think about. If you add to that then the fact that Qatar sort of came in from the cold earlier this year, you know, there'd been a 3 or 4 year sort of long running dispute between Qatar and the rest of the GCC, which has you know, there's sort of ceasefire has been declared on that. So all of a sudden in the space of 6 months, you've gone from the UAE's back in play on a major regional basis, and I think that's an important point to illustrate here. And, you know, looking at the regional opportunities, the big brother, if you like, to immediately to our west is Saudi Arabia, which is much much bigger in terms of population. It's 25-30 million people, much bigger in terms of GDP spend, and for obvious reasons. And as you're probably aware from other webinars you've been on or just reading the paper, Saudi is ploughing ahead with really once in a generation growth agendas and societal agendas in terms of bringing themselves sort of 40 years up to speed in the space of 5 years, or rather 8. What is it? Vision 2030. And so there's a huge amount of activity there, and it's not just buying stuff, by the way. It's changing things, it's improving things, it's putting in place modern infrastructure, modern practices, and bringing Saudi up to speed with the sort of the wealth and the wherewithal that it has at its disposal. From a UAE perspective, the UAE is still probably the best place to access Saudi from. It is kind of Middle East for beginners here. It's normal times. There's obviously regular flights. That's not been the case recently. But you should also be aware that within that, with all of that financial muscle that Saudi's deploying, they are now starting to sort of use a sort of carrot and stick as well in terms of encouraging foreign companies to actually set up in Saudi if they want to deal with Saudi government supply chains and businesses, that sort of thing. So I think you're going to see sort of more from Saudi both here in the UAE and internationally, but it's certainly something to be aware of as you look at your regional business plan. Paul also mentioned some of the things going on around what I had on my list here around sort of societal change in the UAE in terms of new laws around even things like drinking alcohol. Couples can now cohabit without being married, the way that foreign wills are treated, and then obviously there's a big one there around 100% ownership of companies and not requiring a local partner. I mean, I think I'd say two things on this. Firstly, if you like, a sort of a caveat on that is that sometimes in the region laws and new rules can be announced before the legislation is necessarily enacted and operational. And I've had a few cases of that, of people saying, "Oh, well, I want to start can I change my 51% company to a 100% company?" And the answer at the moment is probably no, because that's a federal law. The UAE is made up of 7 different emirates. The emirates themselves need to now put in place mechanisms and processes for doing so. And I think that's something for doing business in the region in general. Just be aware of there can sometimes be a lag between announcements and sort of operationalization, if you like, and delivery. The other thing though there is, Paul mentioned about the UAE was hungry to attract talent, get people to stay and get people to invest. And I think all of these rules and these developments, and I don't think we've seen the last of them, by the way, are designed to get people to come and stay here, to come and invest here, not just to come and live here, but to come and bring businesses like the ones that have been mentioned. And because the region is getting more competitive, and the Saudi are doing their thing, and Qatar and Bahrain and elsewhere, the UAE, which for so long had sort of been the Usain Bolt front runner, the neighborhood has just now got competitive, and it's a good thing, because it means the UAE is no longer reliant on being the default setting, if you like, and is sort of sharpening its pencils in terms of attracting companies like you. And I think that leads us then into sort of, how do you do business here? Well, you need to invest. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you need to invest, £1 million in building a factory in Jebel Ali or anything like that, but you need to invest your time, yourself, and your business to be successful here. And I think all of us on the call, and I'm interested as well to hear from our case study, if you like, after us, the greatest factor or arbiter in success in this region, the success in this country versus not. Now, if I look at the 45 companies we've had into our incubator, the guys who've succeeded versus the guys that failed, it hasn't been about a sector, it hasn't been about funding, it's been about the ones who have come in, brought 1 or 2 people with them, gone for it. It's probably taken them a year or 2 to sort of get red numbers into the black, versus the ones who have, oh, okay, I've got a license now, I'll come and go. And that's the difference. It's around coming in, doing it properly. Phil, I think, mentioned, and Paul did as well, around that you've got this huge community and network of support, starting with the Welsh government and the Welsh diaspora, to the British government, to the British Business Group, to the British Centres for Business, etc., etc. There's a massive amount of goodwill for you to tap into, which should actually help sort of de-risk your investment. But you know, you've also got to remember where Dubai is. You know, if you look at the Emirates route map, within 4 to 5 hours, you've got a third of the world's population. Within 10 hours, you know, sort of a reasonable long haul flight, you've got 2/3 of the world's population. So it's a very competitive place. You know, it's all very well your competitor from Wales might not be here, but you can bet your bottom dollar that your competitor from Bombay or from Singapore or from Bangkok is here. And how do you differentiate? Well, you know, I think it's probably fair to say that Welsh companies aren't necessarily going to be in the best position to differentiate on price compared to some of your developing world competitors. So it's about your approach, it's about your presence, it's about being here. This is very much a relationship market and getting to know people, being sort of seen and respected. And the conversation you start today, you know, it might infuriate you. It might take 6 months to develop, and it won't necessarily be a linear path and process. You know, you won't hear anything for 2 months, and then you'll get a WhatsApp, and then things, you know, things will come and go in that sense. But really, the you know, if there's one thing you can remember from what I've said today, it's plan on being here in some way or form, have a presence. That could be with an agent and a distributor who's good, who, you know, Phil and we can help you pre-qualify, get to know, understand all of that sort of thing. But doing business on a fly in, fly out basis, which obviously for the last year has shown to be sort of pretty tricky, will only get you to a certain ceiling. So medium long-term success depends on that sort of personal investment and that corporate investment. I've seen some questions come in. I'm not going to answer them now. I think we're doing questions at the end, so I'll save them up. And I'm not sort of been reading them, so I don't know if they're for me specifically. But I think I'll hand over at this point back to you, Phil. Very happy to answer questions at the end, and I hope that's just been a useful sort of snapshot, starting with the sort of the macro and things that are happening down to the region, down to the country, and then down to what I hope is useful advice on what your approach might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Joe. And, you know, really interesting to hear what you have to say about, you know, you had to say about UAE with that regional access, about Israel opening up, Qatar reopening, and also being a neighbour to Saudi Arabia with its own giga projects. And I liked your line that the UAE is the Middle East for beginners. I think that's something that we should all bear in mind. Positive to hear about some of those regulatory changes, and in terms of entering the market, I think you're absolutely right. You know, it's about commitment and showing commitment to the market, patience, and also relationship building. So thank you very much, Joe, and we will take those questions at the end. So now I'd like to turn to Samir Hassan from Concrete Canvas and ask Samir a few questions about his experience in the market. Samir, I won't ask you to put your camera on because I know there's going to be, you know, you're out of the market at the moment and could experience some technical issues. So if you could just say hello and let me know that you're there.
Right, Phil. Yes, I'm here. I can hear you well. I hope you hear me well as well.
We can.
Thank you so much for giving me this chance to talk to you and give the kind of experience I've got in the market. Just one note, excuse some noises that might come from the background here, some motorcycles that are unavoidable. So, and then yes, I'm happy to listen to you and talk.
That's great. Thank you, Samir, and many thanks for your time this morning. Could I start by asking you sort of what are the key tips that you'd have for our listeners that would help them to enter the market or grow their exports in the UAE?
Yes, sure, Phil. So just to give a small background, like you introduced me here, I worked in UAE all my professional life until now, 13 years. I had 10 of them into direct sales. This is because I want to talk about direct sales and indirect sales. So I spent 10 years doing direct sales through a company in UAE based in Dubai. Then I moved 3 years back to Concrete Canvas, and now I'm doing totally indirect sales. So basically I have experienced both worlds. And now from what I can see that most of the companies who are mostly will be producers who are coming to the MENA region and UAE specifically to sell their products. So what I can say here that yes, you need to shift your mindset from doing direct sales into your markets, into doing now indirect sales inside UAE and MENA region, and there is a huge difference. I know you all know about it, but it's almost sometimes you forget and you work with a mindset of direct sales, which might not work for you here in the region because you are away. Like Joe said, you really need to invest a lot of time and sometimes money. It depends how extreme you want to go. Like for example, for us in Concrete Canvas, now I am based in Dubai and I look after the indirect sales in the MENA region. Maybe you can do this directly from your country, from Wales. You can do and manage the relationship with the distributors. That for me, as someone who's working in the region, I cannot see another options if you want to really work and your work to grow is having a distributor is really not optional. You need to hit the market with someone in there. Now the big challenge is choosing this distributor. It's not an easy mission. Many companies you will find they fit with your profile, they look great, you really have a nice criteria for choosing distributor and you spend a lot of time choosing them, but it is not an easy mission. I have done a couple of these trials now already in the market. In some markets I was successful, in some other markets I was not, unfortunately, and it's a matter of experience. It's not easy to say how pick and choose, but at the end it comes to your criteria. Define your criteria. Talk to the people, come and see them, visit their offices. Do not trust what the online and websites and social media says. I know it's hard to come here and see and all these distributors, and this is maybe where you Phil and your team can help people here because you are already in the MENA region and you can talk and see the people more easily than traveling. Talk to a couple of distributors, qualify them, talk to them, see who is the sales team. At the end, you will be competing really with the products of your distributors. It's a little bit different from when you do direct sales. Now with indirect sales, you are competing with the products of your distributors more than competing with the products that really compete with you on the technical level. You will reach to the technical level later. But to reach to this later, you really need to talk to your distributor and be with him online almost every day.
Thanks, Samir. I think, some valuable insight there. And, as you were saying, in terms of selecting and working with a distributor, you've really got to do your due diligence on those distributors, and you've got to find, I suppose my advice would be to find one that matches the culture of your company. And Sam, I think you've touched on a few of those things to be wary of, but what do you see as sort of the main challenges or pitfalls that exporters should be wary of when exporting to the UAE?
So basically, the typical challenges that you face in your country, mostly you will find it here. And I'm talking when you reach to the technical level and the pricing level. Of course, prices are very challenging here. Although sometimes you hear that maybe they pay more sometimes here, but it's not that easy. Reaching to put your product into the specifications, have it in there, introducing it to the people. It's not that easy mission, and it needs time. Again, like Joe said, you need to invest a lot of time here. But now this time maybe not not invested by you directly. It will be through someone, you know, the distributor here in this market. And here you will need to build that trust between you and him, that you really need to have him really truly qualified. When you sign with him officially, you need to start the onboarding process and the training. The training is not that easy as well. You need to have a lot of meetings, face-to-face, online, product introductions, many things to get really your distributor has his hands on your product clearly. Now, maybe I emphasize more on this point because we have a patented product that's not similar to any other product in the market. So all the information that our distributor should know should come actually from us, not from his previous experiences. So for me, it's a little bit more complicated. But if you are producing a product that is similar to other products in the market, for sure you will have your competitive edge. So that should be defined very clearly to your distributors. And at the end, at the bottom line, choosing the correct distributor is the point. And from it, really, you can build on. But having a wrong distributor, and I know from a personal experience, it takes a lot of time, sometimes up to 2 or 3 years to change and get out of that distributor. And that's a lot of time and money. I know it's not easy to lose years here. Nobody will welcome that.
Thanks, Samir. You know, I think, you know, just emphasizing some of the things you've said, you know, again, back to that selection of distributor and building trust, as you said, with a local partner, I think is absolutely key. Prices, you said, you know, can be challenging, and I think that's an assumption that people in the UK be wary of. You know, around just expecting the streets are paved with gold here. There may be some very nice flash cars driving around, but they do like to bargain and they will drive hard on price. So and also I think, you know, really key tips there in terms of, you know, it's going to take time. These relationships take time and hard work. So again, I think, you know, echoing what Joe was saying as well. Finally, Samir, I know you've had some successes in a number of markets across the region from your base in Dubai, but I know also that conditions are difficult at the moment. But what is your sort of, in a nutshell, what is your view of the market going forward?
Well, honestly, Phil, from our point of view as people in the construction market, I always thought of the MENA region market, or the GCC, if you want to be like a little bit specialized in GCC. It was always and still for us in the construction side a projects market. So there's always a couple of projects here and there, no matter how much the situation is bad. There'll be always a couple of projects that are ongoing. And even now, the times are really difficult. I know it's hard on everyone, but still there are projects running. Like Paul said, yes, I second his opinion. Yes, the market looks positive. But again, no matter how bad it is, there's always a project that you can sell your product in. But again, it goes back to your distributor and to how much time he is investing, especially if you don't have the product that keeps selling. It's not a cash cow, and it's something that you need to build on to start generating sales, and that's very, very hard. The market is not that bad as we think. I always see a project or two that I can offer my product in, and most of them are large. What I think the great challenge in such market is you might sell with hundreds of thousands of pounds in a year, and you might sell nothing. And the difference between these is really a very thin line. So you could be very successful and you could be extremely bad. So just be patient, give it time, give it sometimes more than what you think it takes to reach the projects. You need to focus on your distributor. Again, I know I said this many times. You need to focus on registrations, and usually these needs to be proposed by your distributor, because he is supposed to be the one who knows about the market, who understands your product, who understands where you should really get approvals. And this takes years. Sometimes it does take more than a year. So be aware of this, specifically in the oil and gas sector. It does take a lot of time. Generally speaking, be open to offer free samples, maybe free pilot projects, because this will be required specifically if you are offering a product that doesn't have a similar competitor in the market. People doesn't like to be the first one to use the product usually, and that's a huge challenge. Maybe with free samples, pilot projects, factory visits, things could change, but everything takes time.
Thanks, Samer. And, really good to hear that, despite the difficult conditions at the moment, you feel as though that there are always projects around both in the UAE and the wider region. Thanks again, Samer, so much for that insight into doing business here. Now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Joe Chard, who will talk through some of the trade activity we've got planned in the UAE over the next year or so. Joe.
Thanks, Phil. As Phil mentioned, I'm Deputy Regional Manager for the Middle East and North Africa, based at the British Embassy with Phil in Dubai. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the UAE is a hub for exhibitions and trade shows, and throughout the calendar year, a number of events are held in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Due to COVID, a large amount of those events have been cancelled and postponed over the last year and a half, and as a result, event organisers have been exploring hybrid arrangements with a virtual offering. Some of these events are still continuing to work with hybrid platforms going forward. I'll highlight some of the upcoming trade shows and exhibitions taking place in the UAE, where Welsh Government has previously had a physical presence, and also the events that we're working on in the hope that travel restrictions will be eased and companies will be able to travel and participate in person. So Big Five, a construction and infrastructure trade show, will take place between the 12th and the 15th of September this year. The trade show brings together the global construction community to explore opportunities in the Middle East, Africa, and also South Asia. There won't be a delegation from Wales travelling to Big Five this year as in previous years, but we will be working with the Department for International Trade, DIT, on activity which will coincide with the trade show, such as Meet the Buyer events, and we'll keep any companies interested updated on any of the activity planned. World Expo, I've mixed up, sorry. Bear with me a second. World Expo 2020 Dubai will follow starting on the 1st of October and run for 6 months until the 31st of March 2022. Welsh Government has become an official partner of the UK Pavilion at Expo, and the partnership allows us to hold Wales branded events on the UK Pavilion, which will coincide with a number of trade shows taking place during the first quarter of 2022. The Welsh Government programme at Expo will have an overarching theme of sustainability and innovation, and we'll have a focus on life sciences, food and drink, and technology. There will also be activity highlighting the creative industries in Wales, and we'll be touching on culture, the arts, and also sport. 2022 will kick off with Arab Health, which is a medical and healthcare trade show, which will return to its traditional January slot. It'll be taking place between the 24th and 27th of January. If travel guidelines allow, as in previous years, Welsh Government will support a delegation of medical and healthcare companies from Wales to travel to Dubai to participate. Arab Health will be followed by Gulf Food, an annual food and drink exhibition targeted at the global food and hospitality industry, and will take place between the 13th and the 17th of February. Again, Welsh Government has previously supported Welsh food and drink producers to participate at Gulf Food, and if travel guidelines allow, we will be recruiting producers to participate in the event next year. Following Gulf Food, Welsh Government will host a multi-sector Expo market visit to Dubai between the 26th of February and the 4th of March, which will coincide with St David's Day. The Welsh Government programme at Expo is still in development, but there may be an opportunity to participate at activity taking place at the UK Pavilion that week, including attending our annual St David's Day networking reception, which will be hosted on the UK Pavilion at Expo next year. And finally, GISEC, the Arab world's largest, most impactful cybersecurity exhibition and conference, will take place towards the latter end of March between the 21st and the 23rd. Welsh Government isn't planning a delegation visit, but similarly to Big Five, we'll work with DIT on supporting activity which will coincide with the exhibition. If anyone is interested in finding out more about the events highlighted, further details can be found online. I'll share the link in the chat box to Welsh Government's Overseas Events programme. If you're interested in attending a trade show that takes place in the UAE, which isn't included in the Overseas Events programme, please get in touch. If you're not already connected with the Welsh Government International Trade Advisor, or ITA, we can provide an introduction through Lee and Nick from the export team who are on the call today, and they'll be able to provide further details around the support available from Welsh Government to attend any of the trade shows and exhibitions which are not included in the Overseas programme. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And as you can see, the UAE has traditionally been and continues to be a real hub and centre for trade shows in the region, not just servicing the UAE or the region, but global trade shows as well. And we, as you can hear from Joe, we've got a fair amount of activity coming up in the next year, particularly with Expo. That's certainly keeping us busy here. So now we've sort of come to an end of the formal presentations, and we've come to the question and answer session. So I will hand over to my colleague Alan Jones to facilitate the questions and answers. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Phil. There are a couple of questions in the chat bar. The first one being from Simon regarding the payments culture in the UAE. His company's experienced very slow to no payment from customers in the region in the past year, with governments being blamed for turning off the taps. And is it a concern for future growth aspirations and are letters of credits accepted in the region? Joe, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, look, yes, I think payment in the country and in the region can be an issue, and it's not uncommon to see, you've agreed 60 days and it becomes 90, 120 or longer. So I think you do need to be eyes wide open on that. Obviously, you can and should negotiate contracts properly. You shouldn't get into something that you wouldn't accept anywhere else in the world. I mean, and I think you do see that because sometimes the numbers are big. You forget about the cash flow impact. But without sounding like a sort of a stuck record, I think it comes back to the point about the commitment and presence. If you've got somebody here, you're better able to manage and mitigate these sorts of issues than if you're just sort of, if you're in Wales and you're sending emails every week, so a kind reminder, where's my payment? You build up a relationship with your client, issues might happen, but if you know the guys in procurement and the other guys in accounts, that your client, there's normally a quicker way to sort of overcome this and understand what's happening, get a partial payment if things are stuck or slow. So yeah, I think the answer is yes, it can be an issue. Don't get it, do your own research and then make sure you're managing your client properly. And there's ways of sort of taking this thing out of this. With regards to letters of credit, yes, I think they are increasingly prevalent. I've not heard anything otherwise, and particularly for, let's say, old-fashioned exports in terms of sending a container out and letters of credit on that are sort of recognized upon certain shipment milestones. I think that's a very common way of doing business.
Thanks, Joe. I'm not sure the amount of the payments concerned, but if you're involved in large contracts, then you can be protected through the UK Export Finance Scheme, especially for the large construction companies. That's a fallback situation with guarantees as well. The second question here is from Graham, asking about information about the glass fibre manufacturing industry in the region. He's aware of some activity in Saudi, but is there elsewhere? Have you come across anything, Phil?
No, not specifically on the glass fibre manufacturing industry. I think, you know, if Graham would like to find out more about that, then I think it's certainly worth a discussion with one of the ITAs. One of you know, I'm not sure whereabouts Graham's company is based, but you know, whether it's yourself, Alan, or one of your ITA colleagues, about, you know, potential export services, maybe ITD, which is the one for research in the market, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Just having a look. Can find Graham's details.
I don't know if any of the other speakers are aware of sort of the glass fibre manufacturing industry in particular. Sorry,
Phil, not an area of my speciality. Happy to help, and like you, we could look into it, but not something I'm aware of.
No, not from my side.
For me neither, Phil. Sorry.
Okay. I think probably the best course of action would be for Graham to engage with the ITAs on that, and to look at the potential of doing some more in-depth research into the market.
Yeah, Andrew has agreed to take it forward with Graham. A question here from James regarding the medical surgical instruments market within the UAE and what impact the pandemic's had on market expectations moving forward. Who would like to take this on?
I can. So, I mean, we had the Arab Health Trade Show here 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago. And that's normally held at the end of January. There's normally 70,000-80,000 people in town for that. It was pushed back 6 months and was a much reduced show. Unfortunately, there weren't any UK or Welsh delegations because of the red listing and how obviously difficult it would be to get back. However, you know, we were involved with some other clients, and the quality of the show was strong, and what we were hearing was, although the numbers were down, that the quality of the visitors was up, and companies across the spectrum, but mainly in devices, found a lot of very firm interest, and reported that it was, you know, it was at least as good as last year when there was probably 3 or 4 times as many people there. So I think, you know, anecdotally that should give you some comfort that it is, you know, that it's still a positive industry. I don't think that there was such a slowdown here in the UAE as there has been in the UK in terms of non-essential elective surgery rather being postponed and pushed out to allow for sort of COVID considerations and focus. So I think a lot of procedural things have still happened, which is obviously where devices tend to come into play. So from my knowledge, it's, you know, the positive story that was intact 2 years ago is still intact now, if you like. Arab Health 2-3 weeks ago sort of bore that out, if you like, and I'd still say it's a good place to do business. And I think from a UAE perspective, that regional thing is very much the case in the medical industry, where that whole belt from Morocco through to Bangladesh looks at what's happening in Dubai, looks at what's happening in the UAE and says, oh, well, that's interesting, I want one of those type thing. So there is a real, you know, if you can get your equipment into the market here, if you like, the marketing impact of that from a regional basis, it tends to be quite strong.
Thanks, Joe. I can't see any further questions in the chat bar. Do you want to close, Phil?
Alan, I just wanted to come back quickly and give a comment on the payment. I mean, I think Joe really had a good summary on everything on that. I think, look, 2020, obviously it was an exceptional year, and many companies would have slowed down that payment cycle. So I think if you look at it over the last 12 months, maybe there was problems. But again, that wasn't normal. That was just companies preserving cash. And it wasn't that they weren't going to pay, they may have slowed it down. So certainly now with a bounce back and recovery, things are flowing through normally. And look, I'm a CFO, so this is an area very close to my heart, of course. But all the advice on, getting the paperwork right, agreements in place, get your invoicing right, understanding the customer and the payment cycle, and Joe mentioned about finance and procurement, knowing who to go to, who to elevate it to, who do you call when something gets stuck. But generally you will get paid, and hopefully on time, if not maybe slightly late, but you will get paid if there's no issues like that. But so I think don't be distorted by what happened in 2020. Things have got back to kind of normal sort of order to cash cycles now.
And you've heard that from one of the leading CFOs in the UAE.
Signing the checks.
Thanks.
Do they still exist? Do they?
Thanks, Alan. I was just gonna emphasise on one of the things that you mentioned very briefly. UK Export Finance. UK Export Finance, UKEF, they do have a presence here in Dubai. They have a very small team based with the DIT team at the embassy here in Dubai, and UKEF funding is available for this market and other markets around the region. We've seen a number of projects here, large projects that have UKEF financing, and that means that with those projects comes a requirement, an obligation for the contractor to use a certain percent of its supply chain from the UK. So that's another, I think, opportunity in this part of the world is to look at those UKEF funded projects. I think are there any further questions, or is that it, Alan? Sorry, Alan, I think you were muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the final question, I think. How to approach the food and FMCG industry effectively as they're struggling here in Wales?
Yeah, actually, this one, I think, Akbar, good to hear from you. Good to see you. And I think this one, your services are primarily aimed at, correct me if I'm wrong, aimed at food and drink companies based in the UK that are looking to export here. I think this is where you would really benefit, I think, from engaging with Food and Drink Wales and the Export Club. So I don't know if you've had any contact in the past with the Food and Drink Wales Export Club, but that's certainly a group that we can put you in touch with. And I think we do have Rhiann Williams on the call from our food and drink team. So Rhiann, if you're there, if I'm wrong, please, or if there's anything else you think of, please do let us know. But I think as a starter, Akbar, I think we should be introducing you to the Food and Drink Export Club of Wales.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think if that's the last of the questions, I think we can wrap up there and draw the webinar to a close. Absolutely on the dot, 1 o'clock. Thank you very much. I'd really like to thank very much our speakers, Paul Giles, Joe Hepworth, Samir Hassan, and Joe Chard, and also to all of you exporters in Wales. Thank you to all of you for listening and joining us today. a reminder, please do complete and return the feedback form, which we will send to you. Please engage with your Business Wales or your Welsh Government international trade advisors, who will be able to advise on Welsh Government's export services, and where appropriate, and at the appropriate time, set up a one-to-one call with my team in the region. I think, you know, there are difficult times at the moment. We all know it. The pandemic is a global one. There are other issues to contend with as well. But I think, you know, hopefully you've got from the panel today a sense that there are opportunities in the UAE, in this particular market and in the wider region. So with that, I'll say diolch yn fawr, and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Diolch.